One of the fascinating things about this job is that if I do my job well, many students figure out that they don't need me after a relatively short amount of time. And so let me see if I can save you a little bit of that hassle right from the start by watching a short 3 or 4 minute video. This is a talk that I give almost all of my students when we first meet. One of the challenges that many students have in academics is that they don't respect themselves and their time enough. And so let me give you an example of that. Imagine a typical busy day for a student. You go into a class, maybe you're not all the way caught up on the material, but you're doing your best. You try to pay attention, you take some notes, you understand bits and pieces of what the professor is saying, and then you leave and go and do your homework at some point where you feel like you really put forth the effort and it feels like you're being a student. And then the test time comes and you really do your work and study hard for the test, and then you wonder why you're not doing better when you're trying so hard. And I would say stop trying so hard. Instead, prioritize managing your time. Let me give you another scenario where instead of studying for tests, you take that time and you put it before the class that's coming so that when the teacher speaks, you're ready to understand the material being presented. And then when they're presenting that material, you're going to be actively engaging a conversation with the teacher in your head because you're going to be writing notes in your notebook fast. Keep going, especially those professors that really like to talk fast. This is great training for your academic strategy. Thank that professor for pushing the class hard and prove you can be competitive in this environment. Take notes fast. These notes are not to be read later and fully comprehended. This is for the purpose of taking what the teacher is saying, taking it out of your short-term memory, and getting it into your long-term memory so that information is available not just at the coming test, but at the final exam and beyond without having to study it again. So when you leave this class, remember short-term memory is precious. It's so vivid, it's so alive. Where long-term memory, things get lost if you don't bank that short-term memory into the long-term memory. And so I would suggest shortly after class, as soon after class as you can manage, find a private place to sit and be quiet and revisit those notes. I recommend using a different color pen and really going through the notes carefully. I say it takes about half the time of the total class. If you sit with an hour class where the professor's really moving fast, going back and spending a half hour after class, really going through those notes and making sure that you comprehend as much as you can from that half hour, and then doing your assignments on time so that you're prepared for the next class. And then if you find yourself studying for tests, realize that maybe you didn't do everything exactly the best way you could. Because yes, we need to review for tests, but we should not be learning new material at test time. And if we perfect this process, you're going to see grades rise significantly in a short amount of time. I just had one student, I got a wonderful letter from her father. We only met 2 times. And then he wrote and said, "Thank you so much." And her grades are up and she doesn't need you anymore, which is the biggest honor that you can possibly give me as a tutor. We met 2 times and she was struggling in chemistry, and now she feels proficient and strong, not because I'm here nursing her along and explaining every little thing, but because she picked up a different strategy. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not useful as a tutor. What you could be using me for is getting a conceptual understanding of difficult to understand concepts and then layering in math on those. And that is something that I am incredibly good at and proficient at, and I can help save you a ton of time if you're in an environment where those resources are not readily available to you. If your professor's explaining things to you and you're sitting in class and saying, "Wow, this really doesn't make sense to me," then I love to be of help in that place. And of course, it's better if we pick a schedule and a time so that we're meeting shortly after your classes and you can take what the professor said and we can digest it and break it into reasonable pieces, and then we can get examples and work through examples and make sure your notes are robust and your comprehension is complete before you go into the next class. So you're as ready as you can be to learn from that professor moving forward. I'm also really good at catching people up who have massive voids. Students find themselves in calculus, yet they're lacking trigonometry knowledge and they're lacking basic algebra knowledge. Of course, I can be massively useful in this environment. So we kind of got to separate in our heads what is best used time with a tutor and what is best used time in your own personal space that you can manage on your own simply through time management, respecting your time, and saying that if you're going to commit time to something, you're going to make sure that that time is preserved in your brain, in your long-term memory. And so I would love to work with you. I'm Jason, and I try to keep my rates reasonable, and I try to use our time efficiently. I show up prepared every time. And so I ask that you send it materials in advance, and I'm always willing to wing it whenever you end up short on time. Excellent. Thank you very much.